Welcome to the RotoWire Fantasy Baseball Podcast. I'm your host, James Anderson, and we are brought to you by Prize Picks. Use the promo code ROTOPOD for a 100% deposit match over at Prize Picks. My guest this week is Melissa Lockard of The Athletic, and usually have Melissa on to preview the Oakland Athletics before the season, but I'm actually glad that we're doing this now because I think we actually have maybe more to talk about and, a large sample to analyze with some of these players. And they're actually, not the worst team in baseball, like they might have been predicted to be before the season. So very happy to have Melissa on the show. Melissa, I just want to start with Mason Miller because he's obviously the top draw in Oakland right now. He's the player that casual fans know about, the top fantasy option on the Athletics. And I want to ask you if Mason Miller stays relatively healthy over the rest of this season. Do you think he or the team would consider trying it again as a starter? Or is everyone sort of at peace with the idea of him just being the best reliever possible?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question because if we had done this at the start of the season, I would have said for sure they were still thinking of him as a potential starter. The only reason they have him in a relief role is essentially he has only a certain number of innings he's going to be able to throw just based on the number of innings he's been able to throw the last couple of years. And so they figured, why not use those in the most high leverage way possible? That said, like obviously they had no idea he was going to take to pitching in the pressure of a ninth inning the way that he has. It could be where he ends up, but I mean, he certainly has the stuff to be a starter. It's not like he's just that 2-pitch pitcher. He's used mostly 2 pitches because he doesn't need his other stuff as often in a short inning, but he's got a lot of different weapons he can use. His command is good enough that, you can stretch him out a lot further. So I think it remains to be seen a little bit, but I think mostly trying to get him through a fully healthy season is the biggest goal. And if that happens, then I think, the options on the table can be, pretty wide for him.
Yeah, he's so fascinating because there's just so many different ways his career could go. And obviously the health and durability is something that's very important to Mason Miller's fantasy value. There's been definitely stretches this season where I think you could argue he's the best reliever in baseball. And so it's a big time predicament in terms of, are you satisfied with just being the best reliever in baseball? Do you want to try to be one of the best starters in baseball, which he obviously has the stuff to do? So very interested to sort of see how the rest of his season goes and how that all goes in the off season. Do you know whether he personally has a strong feeling about viewing himself just as a starting pitcher, or is he kind of just up for doing whatever the team thinks is best?
Yeah, I mean, I think he got to the big leagues so quickly. His college career was a little bit different than most college careers, and the fact that he sort of moved around a lot, it kind of clicked for him late in his college career. So I don't know that he's married to a particular image of himself. That said, I think most pitchers would prefer to be starters over relievers just in general, because, that's where you have the biggest impact in sports. But, if he's challenging for Rolaids, awards every year and he's making all-star teams as a closer, it's not going to be like a tough sell to keep him in that role, I wouldn't think.
So I've already got comments from fans of other teams that would want their team to trade for Mason Miller. Everyone sort of sees Oakland as sort of, well, let's just go get Oakland's best players because they're going to trade him eventually, right? Is this the type of thing where he's going to be on Oakland for several more years, barring something crazy, or could you actually envision them just selling high when he's got a bunch of years of control still, maybe even before, once arbitration starts, or maybe early in the arbitration process? How do you sort of see the team and Mason Miller riding out from here?
Yeah, I mean, it's weird, right? Because there's a part of that sentence there that the Oakland part that disappears at the end of this season. And I think that creates a big unknown, and it's not really clear how the front office is sort of approaching at this point this idea that they're going to be this nomadic existence in Sacramento for a couple of years, then maybe end up in Las Vegas. Obviously, the pitching environment is going to be different in Sacramento. It'll be very different no matter what if they're in Las Vegas. So team building and the way that they've built a team over the last 20 years with this front office is going to change kind of dramatically. I haven't gotten a sense there's necessarily a foresight or a plan in place to address all that yet. And I don't blame them, since the whole narrative seems to change every day about where they're going to be. But that could drive what they decide to do with Miller. I think in a normal year, a normal situation, there would be no reason that they would deal him now, unless you're talking about getting like Jackson Holiday for him, which they wouldn't, because the Orioles not going to make that deal. So I think, in a normal situation, but in a situation where you don't know what's going to happen for 4 years, and if you could get from the Orioles, say, Kerstad and Mayo or something like that, that might be something that would be a little different, because if you're not really building for what you typically built for in Oakland, which was the best pitching that you could do and just a little bit of offense to keep it competitive, that looks different in an environment where you're pitching in a PCL park for your home games. So I don't really know, and I don't know if they know yet, to be honest with you.
Yeah, I mean, he's the longer he stays sort of healthy, I think the bigger the offers will get from other teams. But it definitely is just kind of like, are they even willing to listen? Will be interesting to sort of see how things evolve over the next few years. And just, it's weird talking about a team where we don't even know like where they're going to be. I assume they're going to be in Vegas at some point, but it's just it's weird to talk about them. So there's a lot of A's starting pitchers at sort of AAA and the big leagues injured, who fantasy managers can use to stream in certain matchups. There's some guys that have really good stuff and questionable command. There's guys with good command and questionable stuff. It's just kind of a lot of guys, and I'm not necessarily sure who the best one to ask you about. So the question I have for you is, which A's starting pitcher do you think will have the best season in 2025?
Yeah, I mean, if you're looking at the mix right now, I would say JP Sears has been the most consistent, right? Whether I think he's probably got a better chance of not being on the A's after the trade deadline than Mason Miller. If I was going to point to one guy that I think is sort of maybe flying under the radar as a trade option for other teams. Here's a guy who goes six innings almost every start. The strikeout numbers might not be huge, but they're not too bad. And he's, a pretty solid 3, low 4 ERA, pretty consistently. So, he's probably the guy, if Paul Blackburn could ever stay healthy. He's obviously pitched really well when he's stayed healthy, but, the feet issues have been a problem for him. I really liked what Luis Medina was doing in spring training before he got hurt. He looked good coming off of, the injury when he came back. But again, we don't really know exactly how that's going to look from a command perspective. Joey Estes has looked better in his second time back as well. And so I think there's a lot of upside potential with those two guys. But we have to kind of see over the long term just where that command, especially within the strike zone, I think, is going to lead them. But those two guys probably are the longest term, bigger upside guys of the group right now.
Okay, yeah, I was wondering if you were going to mention Medina. He's the one that I'm the most sort of watching kind of start to start, sort of seeing where that command is, and he's already given kind of the full Luis Medina experience through 2 starts in June with the awesome outing at Atlanta, 6 Ks, 0 earned runs, 2 hits, 2 walks, and then he gets pounded at home by the Blue Jays. Something else I was going to mention is the A's actually have hit, I think, 25 more homers than the Blue Jays this year, which is crazy.
Yeah,
but
that's all they hit is homers and nothing else. They don't walk, they don't get singles, they just hit home runs. So
right, but yeah, Medina gets he walks 5 and strikes out 1 in that home start against the Blue Jays, and that was probably the one where there were probably fantasy managers actually using him in that one because he looked good against Atlanta, and it's like home start. team that's struggling at the plate in Toronto. So is it just kind of like, and every start out, you just don't really know what you're going to get from Medina? Like, does the team see progress with him? Like because there were stretches like this last year too. Like I was even using him in fantasy leagues for like a 3-week stretch in the middle of last summer. Like is there signs of progress, or is it just sort of still kind of the same thing with him where you just don't really know what you're going to get every time out?
Yeah, I mean, he's a younger pitcher. I think the command has taken a big step forward from where it was when he was with the Yankees, right? Like that. I think that is the positive sign. There was a lot of question whether it even made sense to continue developing him as a starter, and he pretty firmly established last year that it's worth it to keep trying him there because the command is good enough that it's possible for him to be a starter. I don't know that it's completely answered the question for sure yet, but in that Toronto start, it was like one really bad inning that kind of escalated on him. And I think that's sort of a thing that happens with younger pitchers sometimes, that they just need to learn to be able to get out of those sorts of escalating situations. But the stuff, like his stuff and Miller's stuff are not that different in a lot of ways, right? Different kind of looking pitchers in terms of height and all that, but the same velocity, the same great breaking ball. So there's a lot to work with there with him. The knee injury was just a really unfortunate timing thing because, you saw this progression kind of coming up in spring training and he's hitting his stride. And now he's sort of back to maybe where you would look like mid-spring training in terms of, where he's at from a buildup perspective. So I wouldn't give up on him, but, I don't know that any young pitcher at that stage of their career, unless they're Paul Skeens, is someone you're going to put in every week and say, okay, I'm good. There's got to be some kind of, softer landing a little bit for those guys.
Yeah. So I mean, Medina, very interested to see how he pitches over the next few months here. And for fantasy managers, like I would definitely just keep an eye on him. I mean, he's got the upside to even be relevant at some point down the line in shallower leagues. So
yeah.
And then Joey Estes, I just didn't really see these types of highs coming for him this early in his big league career. I mean, he's very young, by far the youngest guy in the rotation currently, turns 23 after the season. So kind of an accomplishment for him to even be in this position. Is he someone that you mentioned he's been better this time around? He got a cup of coffee last year. Do you think that he's someone who's like you envision just kind of sticking in the rotation over the rest of the season? Is it still kind of up in the air whether he can maintain that level of consistency?
Yeah, I mean, there's guys like the entire rotation's on the injured list that they started the season with almost. So except for Sears, so like there's some question as to who goes and who stays when those guys come off the IL. But I think, he's a guy that they really like a lot. And if he's pitching well, they're not going to take him out of the rotation for sure. And he's someone who I think maybe was going to fly under the radar for prospect rankings just because, you're pitching in Las Vegas for AAA and it's a terrible league to pitch in general. And that ballpark is really tough. So I think what you saw from him at the AA level pitching against older hitters there was a little more indicative of where he was than, getting to, and also the automatic ball strike thing, I think makes a big difference with how to evaluate those guys. So, but yeah, he's got great stuff. He's a really strong competitor. And I think there's a lot of sense that he could be someone who could be kind of a mid-rotation guy for them for a while.
Yeah, very, very promising season thus far for Joey Estes. One player that I think a lot of fantasy managers, some probably had very high hopes for Zack Gelof. Some probably just saw this, everyday middle infielder who's going to hit for a little bit of power, steal some bases. And, we're all kind of looking for that in the mid rounds of drafts. But Zack Gelof's had a very rough start to the season. He was a very tough player for me to rank on my dynasty rankings, which just got updated on the site yesterday. He's got 5 homers, 7 steals, hitting 187, striking out quite a bit more than last year, 27% strikeout rate last year, 33% strikeout rate for Zack Gelof this year. What have you seen with him? Like, what is he closer to the player we saw last year as a rookie? Is it somewhere in between this version and that version?
Yeah, I mean, I think, again, injury sort of came at an unfortunate time. He got off to a bit of a rough start, was starting to find his swing in New York, and then had the oblique injury, and it sort of started over again. And I think he's pressing a little bit, right? Like, you start off with a batting average under 100, and it's like every game you're trying to get that batting average up to 300, and you just can't do that in one game. So I think that's, a little bit of sophomore slump kind of thing. He's a much better hitter than what you see right now. The strikeouts are always going to be, part of his game. And I think that's something that, that you're going to kind of have to take into account. But, I think a 280 average with around 20 homers and, 15 to 20 steals is a norm for him. It's not anywhere out of the, realm of possibility. And he's also taken a big step forward defensively, I think, which is important because if there was ever any sense that like, oh, maybe he wouldn't be able to stick at second base, that's way off the table now too. So I would be patient. I think by the end of the year, the numbers will look better. And then next year, a stronger start and not an injury to begin it will certainly make a big difference.
Well, that's good to hear. And I definitely agree with you about the defense. That is an important part of his profile. So it's very good to hear that he's performing at a high enough level on that side of the ball. And, this has just been this year's been, I mean, there's always tons of examples. I feel like maybe even more than ever, there's just so many examples of players who are having great seasons this year after down years last year, or kind of, uneven developmental years in past years. So Gelof could be a great buy low guy for next season. So glad to hear that you still see a good player there for Oakland and Zack Gelof. Okay, let's head to a quick message from our sponsors, and then when we come back, I will ask Melissa about JJ Bleday and Brent Rooker. So as I mentioned, the RotoWire Dynasty rankings are fully updated on the site. You can check those out. RotoWire.com/chat if you want to ask me questions about those on Discord. Have you ever dreamed of stepping into the shoes of a general manager? Welcome to So Rare MLB, a groundbreaking fantasy baseball game where you call the shots, take charge, and make your managerial mark by collecting officially licensed digital player cards of your favorite MLB stars. These aren't just any cards, they're your ticket to compete for over $1 million in total cash rewards and other amazing prizes. Imagine winning VIP trips to the MLB All-Star 2024 or getting your hands on signed merchandise from top MLB players. Here's how it works. Use your cards to set your lineup each game week. Real-world plays like hits, strikeouts, and homers will power your team's performance. Climb the leaderboards and snag weekly wins, from cash prizes to more cards and unforgettable experiences. But there's more. Build an iconic collection of your favorite teams and players to unlock gameplay bonuses and exclusive rewards. The rarer the card, the higher your score and the bigger your edge in competitions. And when you're ready to trade, the So Rare Marketplace offers a vibrant community of managers. Engage in live auctions, make instant buys, or trade cards peer-to-peer. Starting is absolutely free. Draft your first team of common cards today and feel the thrill of competition as you climb the ranks to baseball mastery. What are you waiting for? Join So Rare MLB today. Transform your passion for baseball into a quest for glory and get rewarded for your baseball savvy. Sign up today with the link in the description and get 50% off your first pro cards up to $50. It's your passion rewarded. Prize Picks is the best way to get action on sports in more than 30 states across the country. Prize Picks is really simple to play. I can make my picks and submit my entry in less than 60 seconds. You just pick more or less on 2 or more player stats and watch the winnings roll in. Tonight, I like the over on 8 rebounds plus assists for Derek White and the over on 6 rebounds for Drew Holiday in Game 3 of the NBA Finals against the Mavericks. I'd recommend checking out the RotoWire, the new RotoWire Prize Picks app, by the way, if you want to find some good picks. Quick withdrawals, easy gameplay, and an enormous selection of players and stat types are what make Prize Picks the #1 daily fantasy sports app. Download the app today and use code ROTOPOD for a first deposit match up to $100. That's promo code ROTOPOD for a first deposit match up to $100. Pick more, pick less. It's that easy. Okay, we're back here with Melissa Lockard. We're talking Oakland Athletics, and we'll be talking San Francisco Giants shortly. So we talked about Zack Gelof and his slow start to the season. Been really impressed by what I've seen from JJ Bleday and Brent Rooker. How sustainable do you think those starts are for Bleday and Rooker? And maybe this applies more to Bleday than Rooker, but do you see any room for growth even beyond what we're seeing so far from those guys?
Yeah, I think Bleday is sort of an interesting guy. I mean, I think people forget how high he went in the draft, how highly regarded he was coming out of college. When they acquired him, I know there was some comparisons internally a little bit to Mike Yastrzemski in terms of, the kind of player they were thinking they could unlock when they got him, similar to how the Giants were able to sort of unlock that with him when they got him from Baltimore. He's got a really strong approach to the plate, really good athlete. I don't know that he'll ever hit for super high average, but I think he'll get on base a decent clip, and he's got some power and speed. So, I think he's a solid all around player. He's not going to be a star, I don't think, but I think he's certainly someone who can be a solid regular.
Yeah, I think trading for Miami Marlins position players that were highly coveted before the Marlins got their hands on him is a decent strategy. And so that's, obviously, some people might not realize how high he went in the draft. A lot of people probably listening to this remember when he was like a top 50 prospect, and, those days seem a long time ago, but I'm really excited by this kind of, he kind of saved his career, I guess, kind of with this run with Oakland. And I've got him on a decent amount of fantasy teams. So yeah, I'm kind of seeing the same things you're seeing. He's been hitting second for them for quite a while, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, he's basically been hitting second. For quite a while. Is he a guy that you see being platooned over the rest of the season and kind of into next year, or is that something where they might just kind of turn him loose as an everyday guy at some point?
Yeah, I think he's been pretty regularly in the lineup. They don't really have any right-handed center fielders, ironically. I think, Max Schumann, who's been playing a lot of shortstop, can play center field, but they've needed him at shortstop because they also don't really have any healthy shortstops besides Max Schumann. It's sort of a strangely constructed roster. But the only other player that was really getting a lot of run in center was Lawrence Butler, who's in AAA now, and he's left-handed also. So there isn't really kind of any reason to move JJ off of the everyday role. I think ultimately right field might be his best home, just, in a differently constructed roster, but he can certainly handle center sort of similarly to how Yastrzemski has it for times in San Francisco. But in terms of, batting at the top of the lineup, I mean, he's one of the guys that really gives the most consistently good at bats. It may not always show up in stats, but he's seeing them a lot of pitches. He's, giving the rest of the lineup a chance to see what the pitchers are throwing. And they don't have a lot of guys in that top of the lineup that do that consistently. So I would see him being in that top third pretty much moving forward this year.
Yeah. If we'd talked before the season, I would have asked you about Lawrence Butler very early on in the episode. And I would have hoped that he would have been kind of doing what Bleday is doing right now. Maybe with some speed mixed in, but yeah, he's at AAA right now. Brent Rooker, like he's cooled off quite a bit, but he's still slashing 263, 346, 522. Been 51% better than league average, 13 homers, 259 ISO. Is this, he hit 30 homers last year, so this isn't uncharted territory for him necessarily. But people didn't really respect him in fantasy drafts for those 30 homers coming into the year. And he's certainly kind of proven that that's sort of who he is in the power department. Do you see him as just a guy that's sort of locked into this current role that he has with Oakland going forward?
Yeah, definitely. I think he's their DH until some team gives him an offer they can't refuse, right? He was such a big power guy, in college, early on in his Twins career as well. I think there was that joke when they did the stadium rendering and they had his batting average up at 330 and people were dragging that idea. And then briefly he was over 330 for a period of time or something. And everyone was like, oh, look at that. Good for Brent Rooker. But obviously that's not the hitter that he is. Like, it's power, it's not average. Again, like, strikeouts are always going to be a big part of his approach, but at the same time, the power has been really consistent, and it's not an easy environment to hit for power. And obviously, when you're in Oakland, so it'll play even if he gets traded. I think there's probably very few environments that would be harder for him to hit for power, and then the one he's in now. So yeah, I would buy, if you're looking for homers and RBI production, I would certainly buy that. But I would expect the average would be more in that 250 range than the 320, 330 range, moving forward. And I think he's streaky. I think he's shown that last year too. So, if you're going to have to kind of live with the ups and the downs a little bit.
Yeah, gotta live with the ups and downs, people in the comments. So speaking of ups and downs, what's your best guess for Esteury Ruiz's role? Is he even on the team? What's he doing if he's on the team heading into next year?
Yeah, that's a tough one. I mean, he's hurt right now, so it's sort of deferred what decision or not decision they've had to make with him for a role wise. They really didn't have one for him coming into this season. I don't think he would have made the opening day roster had Miguel Andujar not gotten hurt right at the end of spring training, and even then he didn't last on the roster for very long. They just didn't necessarily like what they saw from him, which is kind of surprising given that he was kind of, in some ways, their most exciting player last year. I'm not sure why that was the kind of approach that they ended up with him on, but I don't see a very easy path to him getting another full-time role with them right now. That doesn't mean things couldn't change if they, say, for instance, did trade Rooker and some other things and kind of move things around a little bit. And they're certainly not getting a ton of production from a lot of their other outfielders, but he isn't necessarily number one on their pecking order either. So I wouldn't expect another 50 steal season, obviously, at this point for him right now. And, he may be a guy that benefits from a change of scenery.
Am I mischaracterizing, when they got him in that 3-team deal with Sean Murphy, it seemed like they really, really wanted Ruiz and they really, really liked him. Was that the case back then? And then they just soured on him this quickly?
Yeah, that's kind of like a little bit of their MO. They've done a great job with acquisitions, I think, on balance, but there is sort of a tendency to get somebody, you think you have something not like what you see initially, and then that sort of sticks with that front office. And I think that's what happened there a little bit. I don't know that that's necessarily fair. I think, again, he put up a lot of big numbers in the PCL in an environment where I think some of what his results were going to be inflated by the ballparks he was hitting in. And the speed is something that, I think was not necessarily highly valued for what they were looking for everything else. The defense, he's a converted infielder, hasn't quite figured out his way in the outfield yet. That said, I certainly think there's a lot to work with as a player for him still. He showed a lot more patience in the minor leagues than he's shown in the big leagues. I think if you can unlock that, there's a useful player there. So, I'm not sure if it happens in Oakland. I'm guessing probably it doesn't, but I don't think that there's, I don't think it's unreasonable to think that he's going to, not have I think he'll have a big league career somewhere. I do think, though, in that package, Estes and, Salinas, some of those guys that they got in the trade from Atlanta were more coveted than I think people really realized as part of that deal.
Sure. Yeah, that makes sense. And I agree on I wasn't interested in Ruiz for fantasy this year just because the lack of power and the defense definitely added to some risk with the playing time, and obviously that's borne out. But change of scenery. I wouldn't be surprised if even a smarter team or a team that you might think doesn't need Ruiz might try to get their hands on him and see what they can do there, because
he's like the perfect Kansas City Royal.
Well, that's where he started his. Am I making that up? Wasn't he a Royal?
It was Milwaukee, but no, I don't know. Maybe in the beginning, but I could see him being this guy that the Royals pick up, and then he ends up stealing a bunch of bases in the postseason kind of thing, and becomes another legend there. So,
So Ruiz actually signed with the Royals at 16.
Okay.
And then he was traded to the Padres. He got traded to the Padres in 2017 before he even played in full season ball. So that would be a homecoming if you got to
Okay.
go to
Yeah.
Royal.
No, I see. Make it happen. All right. We're already making deals.
But there is also kind of like if you're on your fourth team,
right.
by the time you're 25, that says something probably. Okay. So, I think there's just so many young, like it's kind of the same thing with the rotation. There's so many young position players that maybe we've mentioned in passing or haven't discussed, where they've been back and forth between the majors and AAA. It's just hard to kind of narrow it down as to which of the guys we really need to focus on. Some former top prospects mixed in there. Are there one or two of those guys that you're still a believer in for this team going forward?
Yeah, I mean, I think Lawrence Butler. We mentioned him briefly. Like, he's not in AAA to be in AAA forever, right? Like, he got off to a slow start. They didn't want it spiraling way out of control. There were some things for him to work on. He was up pretty young. I also think Tyler Soderstrom, it was interesting last night, when he hit that home run, it was sort of reminded me a little of like how Matt Olson came up and struggled and went down. And then people kind of forgot about him nationally as like a real prospect. And then all of a sudden when it clicked, like he was the guy they thought he was going to be. He sneakily has become much better defensively at first base. I don't know how much he's going to catch, or if they'll kind of keep him in a hybrid role like that, but he certainly looks playable at first, which is something that, he could work his way into being there. But I get a little Olsen vibes from him in the sense of like finally figuring it out a little. So those are two guys that I would kind of keep an eye on as maybe people have cooled on, but certainly I think have a lot of potential still.
Yeah, there's definitely interesting stuff statistically with both those guys. And I remember you mentioning I remember you kind of comparing Olsen or Soderstrom to Olsen, maybe even a couple of years ago. Both left-handed first base. Yeah, that's interesting because he is, he's getting on base at a 347 clip right now.
He's not being beaten by velocity nearly as much as he was, when he came up last year. I think his plan is a lot better at the play. I think last year he just was sort of overwhelmed with what he was seeing. And I think you can see that there's the timing's a lot better. Again, I don't know that it's going to like click all at once, but you're starting to see the little bits there. He doesn't have Olsen's discipline. Like, Matt Olson was getting 400 on base percentages and, A-ball, but the power is really legitimate. And he's a much better athlete than I think people realize, just because he was catching for so long, that there's a lot there to like. So I could see him sort of being one of these guys that you forgot about, and then all of a sudden it's like, hey, he's kind of like a person on a bad team you could consider for an all-star.
Yeah, and I already know I'm gonna draft Lawrence Butler on some deep teams next year, just because like he's too talented, he's too young. There's too much of a reason, I think, for Oakland to keep giving him opportunities. Still just 23, and there's a decent amount of red on his Baseball Savant page.
Yeah, he hits the ball really hard. He just wasn't hitting it enough, and I think that's what they went down there to kind of get the better approach back. But he also does have decent plate discipline. I think it needed a little refinement, but he knows what the strike zone is, and he's not going to be overly aggressive. So, when you see those kind of exit velocities, even at a young age, you kind of figure that's going to get better when he has a better idea of what he wants to do at the plate. And then, he offers some athleticism and defense upside as well. And he can play a little first base too. So you may be able to get two positions out of him at some point.
So 3 of my top 4 ranked A's prospects are essentially AAA shortstops in Jacob Wilson, Max Muncy, and Daryl Hernaiz. They're obviously not all going to end up at shortstop, probably Wilson, I would guess. But how do you think they'll all sort of slot into the big league infield mix? Or do you see maybe one of them as like a bench piece over the next year or two?
Yeah, it's funny. All 3 of them are hurt, so it's
right.
They got to all get back on the field at some point. Yeah, I think Jacob Wilson probably has the inside track at shortstop at the moment. He was off to just a ridiculous start before he got the tendonitis in his knee. He still needs to figure out, because he can hit everything, like what the best pitches to hit should be, because that's going to make a big difference when he gets to the big leagues. I think we'll talk about Luis Matos a little later, but that's a similar problem that Luis has had as well. But defensively, he's very polished. He and Max Muncy actually, they played high school ball together under Jack Wilson was their coach. And you can see from how they handle shortstop, that kind of coaching pedigree that they had from a very early age. They both look like big league shortstops when they're out there. But yeah, so I don't know exactly which one of those two for sure will be the everyday shortstop. But, I think Jacob Wilson is making a lot more contact, so that's probably the guy. Though Muncy has improved his contact rate considerably, and he does have a lot more power. So I think we'll have to kind of wait and see. Third base is still an open position on that franchise moving forward. So, one of those guys could end up there. Hernaiz may also end up there. I mean, he was starting to get a lot of regular time there before he got hurt. It was a little disappointing start to his big league career. I think we probably expected to see more consistent contact from him, but he's awfully young still. So I think there's still room to kind of see. But I think all three could get regular bats on that team for a while.
I kind of got the sense, just based on, obviously Oakland loved Wilson in the draft last year, and, they weren't shy about bumping him up the ladder pretty quickly. It sort of seemed like he was maybe on track to make his big league debut this summer if he hadn't gotten hurt. Is that your kind of read on it?
I think it might have come in like within a week or two, because especially like the injuries, the way they've happened. You've got Max Schumann, who's done an amazing job for a guy that didn't even make the Rule 5 protection list, and was barely getting time at shortstop in AAA. Last year, he was having to fight to stay out of the AA there. But he's a utility guy really in the way that he is, and he's had to be their everyday shortstop for most of the season because of the way the injuries have gone. So I think it's not out of the realm of possibility that we would have seen Jacob Wilson already, because I don't know if what he needs to learn can be learned in AAA. He can find the holes in the defense that's not set up by big league scouting reports and, all that sort of stuff. So, the best test for him might be coming against big league pitching, where all of a sudden you realize that hitting these little flares and stuff isn't going to get you what you need. And so you've got to be a little more disciplined. And if he does get a little more disciplined, I think there is more power probably in there than what we've seen, because when he gets one, he can really hit it. But he doesn't always swing at the best pitches to do that with. So I think that's something that we'll have to kind of see. And if he's able to make that switch, he might end up being a lot better player than people, really anticipated.
Yeah, I'd love for, Wilson and I'm blanking on their injuries. I don't remember them being that serious. But
so Wilson's got tendonitis in his knee. I believe Muncy's similar. It's like knee or ankle. None of them are out for the year, but it's one of those things where it's like they need to get pain-free before they're back on the field. Hernaiz had a pretty bad upper ankle sprain that he was kind of tripped across the bag at first base. So but he is actually starting rehab assignment, so he should be getting back on the field fairly soon.
It'd be great if Hernaiz and Wilson could get healthy and then get some more kind of growing pains in this year in the majors. Because I think Muncy, maybe it makes sense for Muncy to be the last guy to arrive, and then you kind of give Hernaiz at least another brief chance over at third base or something like that. If you have Gelof at second and Soderstrom at first, and then you kind of have just those two spots. Because I would guess it ends up maybe Wilson at short and Muncy at third long term, and Hernaiz maybe as a bench piece. But he's so young still, and he had such a good year last year. I'd like to at least see him, get another look against big league pitching before we head into the offseason. Yeah,
I mean, honestly, and certainly by the trade deadline, there's nothing that would be worth doing more than getting those kind of guys at bats and experience, right? Like that should be the goal for their season. So I could see certainly those guys in the second half of the year. And I think you saw Gelof and Soderstrom were called up right after the All-Star break last year. And I could see, a pretty en masse kind of call-up situation at that time for them too.
So are there any other A's players or prospects that you're particularly high on that we haven't discussed yet?
Yeah, I mean, it's it's a system that's got a lot of warts, right? But there are some players that have really, I think, kind of flown under the radar. One that's not like superstar, but I think to keep an eye on the pitching side is, Brady Basso. He came up briefly. They used him as a reliever. They haven't given him a chance as a starter yet, but he's pitched really well in AAA. Since going back down again, was fantastic in AA. Had a really good year last year coming off of Tommy John surgery. Older guy, but lefty that can really move the ball around a lot. So, he's sort of a sleeper for like a future kind of back at the end of the rotation kind of guy. But more upside, I think Colby Thomas in AA and Henry Bolte in high A, both, I'm kind of a sucker for power speed guys, and both of those guys are power speed guys. So, they're, it's interesting with Thomas is sort of similar in some ways to Jacob Wilson in that he doesn't take a lot of pitches, but his power is plus, his speed is really good. He can play really strong defense. And, he's done it in Midland, which is not an easy place to hit for a right-handed hitter. The lefties tend to have a little bit better with the wind there. So I think he's definitely a guy to keep an eye on. And then Bolte, the prediction when he was taken out of the draft, out of high school, was that he was going to really need a few years to get to full season ball and not struggle. And he held his own last year in low A, and in high A, he's been one of the better hitters on that Lansing team. So, I think both of them have a lot of talent and could be worth watching.
Yeah. Interesting deep sleeper there with Basso, and Bolte and Thomas have both been, probably two of the better stories, among hitters in all the minors, honestly, not just the A system. So glad you brought them up as well. Okay, let's move on to the San Francisco Giants. I think these teams are kind of similar to me, at least in terms of on the offense. It's kind of like, where is sort of the hierarchy? And that's especially true, I think, with the Giants, because I feel like they've just got sort of 5 or 6 hitters who are all about as good as each other. So I wanted to ask you to narrow it down and tell me who you think the Giants' 3 best hitters are when everyone is healthy.
Yeah, I mean, I think LaMonte Wade Jr. is, he's been their best hitter when he's healthy, and obviously is not healthy right now. So I would put him at the top. And by hitter, I mean just, guy who can get on base and really make a big difference that way. Jung-Ho Lee was their most exciting hitter, I think, or exciting player in general. And obviously he's out for the year now. And Patrick Bailey is, I mean, considering the struggles that he went through to hit in the minor leagues at the start of his career, has really rounded himself out into a really outstanding offensive player for a catcher. And obviously, what you get with him on the defensive side. So, I would probably rank those 3 guys as the top. I mean, what Heliot Ramos is doing right now has been really fun. He's obviously a super talented guy, and he could be that guy still, just from a talent perspective. But we just have to see if it's going to last for a little longer.
Yeah, I mean, you brought up Wade first, and man, he was just off to such a great start, and it was a lot of fun. And terrible timing on that injury, because at least kind of under the hood metrics sort of suggested that there was more power maybe coming this year, or maybe more power due this year. He only hit the 2 homers in the 52 games, but he's got a 495 X slug, I think a career best for 47% hard hit rate. And it's not like he has a super high ground ball rate either. So, what do you think Wade was sort of in for kind of an even better year than he had last year if he had stayed healthy?
I think so. Yeah. I mean, early season at Oracle with the way that the air is heavy and all that, like, I think powers, unless you're Barry Bonds, is going to be affected a little bit in the beginning of the year anyway, but he was doing everything right, and I think that tends to even out over time for hitters. Again, I'm not sure he's like a 25 homer guy, but I think he's certainly somebody who should get you in like the 15 to 20 range most years if he's playing every day. And I think he really was playing himself into an everyday role and not a platoon role like he had last year.
Wow. Yeah, that'd be great. Everyone in fantasy's always just worried about Giants and their platoons. And if Wade's playing every day, I mean, I think people listening should maybe consider picking Wade up right now. I know he's available in some leagues because of the injury, but our last note on the site was that he was taking batting practice yesterday. So, shallower roto leagues or even, mid-sized roto leagues, I would go look if Wade's available. I think he's first base outfield eligible and just needs another, or I guess, do you think he's done? He's got 12 outfield starts so far this year. Do you think he needs 8 more to get to 20 to qualify for that next year? Is he just first base only the rest of the season, do you think, or could he?
I don't know. Yeah, I mean, it partially depends, I think, on what this hamstring injury is going to be long term and whether they feel like they need to manage it or if it's something he comes back fully healed from. But I think they view him more as a first baseman than an outfielder for sure. Yeah.
So I'm excited about Wade and seeing if he could kind of build off of what he did to start the year. I was wondering if you were gonna bring up Ramos or not. He's there were some underlying stuff in what he did in 2023 that had me just mildly intrigued in terms of post hype, but I was just so scared off by the Giants and their platoons and him being right-handed and just wasn't sure when he was going to get the chance to play every day. And he's just been so good lately. He's been hitting second, so it's just been a really fun story. And Ramos obviously was very young when he was drafted. He was 17 when he was drafted. He's still just 24. Are you where are you at on how much of this you're buying? Obviously the BABIP is through the roof. He's still striking out a ton. So he's not going to just be a 300 hitter or anything like that rest of the season. But are you more optimistic than pessimistic with Ramos? Where are you with him?
Yeah, I mean, I thought he needed a longer run last year, right? I think that was sort of because they were so locked into this platoon situation, they just never had a role for him. And it sort of seemed crazy based on what he was doing in Sacramento, that they wouldn't try to see what they had there with him. He is a first round talent guy who has once been a top 100 guy, who, isn't that old yet. It may not be a superstar career that's sustained for a while, but I don't think anyone should be surprised if he puts together a couple of really good seasons. That said, he, as you mentioned, the strikeouts are a big part of his game. But I think what you see more with a Bob Melvin managed team than a Gabe Kapler managed team is that there's a little more allowance for that. And, if a guy can impact the game, even if he's going to have some swing and miss, you saw with Chris Davis and some of the other guys when Melvin was in Oakland, that's not going to prevent them from letting him play. And what Ramos is contributing defensively too makes it much easier to live with that stuff, right? Because he's still providing some value with the glove, even if there's some strikeouts there. So, I don't see why. If he can put together a good season for the rest of this year, I see him having a regular role with them next year. It's just whether this ends up being a good 3 weeks and then a huge slump the rest of the year or not, I think we have to go another couple of weeks to see. But if he can kind of maintain this for a little while longer, there's plenty of opportunity for a full-time role.
Yeah, I mean, he's hitting the ball just so hard right now. And the Giants they don't have a ton of high upside guys.
Exactly.
So it would make sense to me to just really, give him as much leash as possible and try to develop into one of those types of players that they just haven't developed many of in recent years. Okay. So let's talk about Kyle Harrison. He had a good start earlier this week, but I think he only had 3 Ks. If you had told me 2 years ago that Kyle Harrison would have a 7% walk rate through his first 20 big league starts, I would have thought we'd be talking about one of the most exciting young starters in baseball. But he's just kind of been okay, very good for his age, and he's still just 22. But how does everyone around the Giants kind of feel about where he's at as a big league starter and whether there's kind of a clear another level there for him, or if this is just kind of the guy he is, which is no shame in that at all. But, his strikeout numbers in the minors were obviously quite high. I know that Eno's Stuff Plus model was not quite as high on Harrison at times, but just kind of where is everyone at in terms of Kyle Harrison's first 20 big league starts.
Yeah, I mean, I think they're really happy with it. Like the role they're asking him to play is not the role that he was playing in the minor leagues. Like they need innings from him, which is the exact opposite of what he was being asked to do in the minor leagues, right? Like in the minor leagues, he was a guy who was kind of a 3 or 4 inning and burn. So throw everything you possibly can out there. And in the situation they've been in with injuries and some of the other, guys that are on shorter leashes, it's like him and Logan Webb and, right now Jordan Hicks, but we know that's only going to be for so much longer too, having to shoulder the load of innings. And so I think that's changed his approach a little bit. He's had to pitch to contact a little more. That doesn't mean that he doesn't have the strikeout stuff though. So I think there's still definitely another level there. I think his command within the strike zone can improve. And that's something that when that does improve, you will see all those numbers jump a lot up. But the fact that he's been able to do this is a bit, being kind of forced into a role as a big leaguer that he never did in the minor leagues, I think is really impressive. And, I think he's going to be a really fine starter. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm glad you kind of laid it out that way. It does sort of that context of, them asking him to go out there and give them length. It kind of makes it even more impressive sort of what he's doing, and just kind of for a 22-year-old to be able to make that kind of adjustment against big league hitters and have a decent amount of success. I think it's been impressive. Strikeouts, certainly we want to see them in fantasy, but another guy, I mean, we've hit on a few guys where it's just kind of, I'm excited about maybe investing again next year in fantasy in Kyle Harrison. You mentioned Luis Matos earlier. His career has had some really high highs and some low lows, and he's still, very, very young. He was excellent in the lower levels of the minors, and then he was excellent last year in the upper levels of the minors, but then in 2022, his high A season, just very uncharacteristically poor. And then this year, I think he's been the victim of some pretty bad luck at AAA in the majors, but still the surface stats aren't great. So what type of player do you think fantasy managers should be expecting Matos to turn into in like his age 23, age 24 seasons?
Yeah, I mean, I think that I alluded to this with the Jacob Wilson thing. Like, he is as talented a hitter at hitting the ball, which sounds sort of ridiculous, but is putting the bat on the ball as almost any that you're going to see. But the problem is that that has led to a lot of contact on pitches he can't really do as much damage on as you would like to see. And in stretches where he is doing that correctly, you've seen what he can do, right? He had that couple 2-week stretch where he was like the best hitter in baseball. But there's a lot of those downs when it comes to like, the dips that you see when the contact quality isn't going to be as high. So there's still learning to be done. I mean, the part of the problem too is you're looking at a guy who had to jump into high A coming off a year in the pandemic where there was nothing that was going on. And then, or he was in low A, then he was in high, but like he missed a very crucial year of development there. And, there was a tough hitting environment up in the Northwest League. And so I think you can see where the improvement needs to come, but you can also see where the talent could lead him to. And I think it's just going to be a matter with so many of these guys that can hit the ball anywhere, whether they can adjust their approach enough to be more selective. And, if they can, there's the talents there for him to be a really good player. But if he can't, then I think you'll see what flashes of it and then not much else than flashes.
Do you think the Giants are kind of interested in kind of pushing things more towards these younger guys, sort of going forward this season and into next season? They always sort of seem to have these kind of veterans that, they were the last team with money available in free agency, and so they signed them, but they're just kind of in the way. Do you think they're open to the idea of it just being Ramos and Matos and that type of thing, heading into next year?
I feel like it'd have to be a mix. Like, I don't think they're in a position where they can just go and do like a full on tear down rebuild where you're going to go with like all the young players. I think they're always going to be in the market for whatever kind of, free agents that fit their parameters would be. That said, like their most exciting players and dynamic players have so far been their under 26 age players, right? So I think that tells you a lot about what they should be doing. And I think you have a manager who has done a good job with blending young players and veteran players in the past and kind of working those guys in and figuring out roles for them. So I would imagine that it would probably still continue to be a bit of a mix, but maybe there's more patience with the younger players now than maybe there would have been in the last couple of years. But I don't ever see them fully being like, this is your job and you're going to have it no matter what, even if you're Marco Luciano, even if you're, Heliot Ramos. There are guys that are going to have to still earn them.
Yeah, I don't have a Marco Luciano question prepared. I didn't think he deserved a question on this episode, but I will
note that he did play second base yesterday, in case that's of interest to people in his rehab game. So that could come back up when he gets back to the big leagues.
Sure. I was thinking I had a kind of a real half-baked idea with Luciano that at some point he might be a guy where I would almost look at trying him on the mound like a few years from now if he's just not really figuring things out at the plate, but we're a ways away from that. But
yeah.
Okay. Any other Giants, big leaguers, prospects, under the radar players who've either impressed you or who you've heard really good things about?
Yeah, I mean, I think, Hayden Birdsong got the promotion to AAA this week. And I think as a starting pitching prospect, he's a guy to really keep an eye on. And they're, the Giants have veterans that in theory are going to come back healthy in the second half. But if they don't, he's a guy they could turn to. Bryce Eldridge is off to a fantastic start in low A as a, first year player. I think he's going to be their top prospect for a while. I think there's been some interesting stuff. Walker Martin's just starting to get started in rookie ball. And so you'll sort of see some of those guys. I think the most interesting player, just from could be a surprise fantasy thing, is that Reggie Crawford's been pitching out of the bullpen in AAA. And I was sort of joking with someone that they could try to do a Mason Miller type thing with him, but I think that's not actually an unreasonable plan of action with him. He needs innings. Might as well use that stuff with productive innings on your big league staff than, wasted in AAA in two inning outings. So I could see him joining their bullpen late in the year. And, he's probably not going to get saves over Duvall, but he could certainly get into the mix there, racking up some strikeouts for you. So he's someone to kind of keep an eye on how healthy he stays and how effective he is in AAA.
Yeah, I'm really excited for Birdsong. I love the idea of maybe him getting a taste this year. And I'm as excited about Reggie Crawford, the reliever, as I could possibly be. I don't know. To me, his delivery, and just his stuff and the injury history, I would just I'd be tempted to leave him in the bullpen, and just let him be absolutely filthy in there. I think he's got just a really, really high ceiling as a reliever, but yeah, I mean, teams are always going to be tempted to try to stretch somebody out with his stuff. And the Giants obviously just signed Jordan Hicks to do just that. So
right.
Interesting. Yeah. So that'd be fun if we saw Birdsong and Crawford up in the second half.
Yeah, it certainly wouldn't surprise me at all, especially Crawford at this point. I think there's a lot lower barrier for him to reach the big league roster than probably Birdsong.
Well, Melissa, this has been fantastic. Is there anything that you guys have been working on over at The Athletic that you want to plug before I let you go?
Yeah, no, we actually had a piece up today that was sort of looking at the farm systems that are probably deepest from the contenders that would put them in a good position to be trade deadline matches for bigger deals. And then next week I'll be at the MLB draft combine. So we'll hopefully have lots of good stuff out of that for everybody.
Wow, cool. Yeah, you can do it all. Going to the combine, that's fun. Well, enjoy that, and thanks again for coming on the pod. This has been great. All right, thanks to everyone for listening. We are brought to you by Prize Picks, and you can use that promo code RotoPod for a 100% deposit match.